Hi folks, hope you're doing well. It's 12:15 in the afternoon on the 2nd of the 6th, 2020. 2nd of June. There you go. Yeah, this George Floyd situation. His family have now come out and said they don't want violence. He didn't want violence, protest, looting, rioting, any of that, not at all. Which is obvious. So all these people doing that, they were doing it because of them. It was about them. It wasn't about George Floyd. It was about them. And this is the point. The media and all the rest, they just jump on the flipping bandwagon every time. Rather than challenging it, rather than saying, excuse me, yeah. Okay, you feel strongly about this. I understand that. A man was murdered. We saw it on video. We saw him being killed. That's horrendous. Of course it is. But what you're doing isn't in line with him. It's with his values. It's not honouring him, what you're doing. None of them were willing to do that. Yeah. I suppose partly because some of the media people are being attacked by the police, which again, they're not exactly helping their situation, are they? Jesus Christ! I mean, talk about compounding the BS with the police. You're in trouble for unreasonable force, and then what do? You go with more unreasonable force, shooting at police, shooting at camera people and reporters. Some bloke carrying a massive camera with CNN highlighted all over, shooting rubber bullets at these people. How insane have you got to be to think that those people are a threat to you? I mean, they've got videos of, they've one earlier where there was a camera crew who didn't help in any way, shape or form. There were people trying to loot, and the shop owners were protecting their shop and saying, you're not going to loot here. It's our shop. Yeah, that's not, again, the looters. What? Arrest them. Don't play games with these people. Arrest them. Put them in prison. They're stealing. That's the whole thing. They're stealing. They're not looting. There's no such thing as looting. It's stealing. It's stealing during a riot. That's what looting is. It's people using what's happened to George Floyd as an excuse to go and steal stuff. To break stuff and steal stuff. That's all that is. Utterly ridiculous. But anyway, they had a video where the shopkeepers were trying to protect their shop. And they were trying to call the police. Police cars were going past. They were trying to get their attention to help. Then all of a sudden, not just one police officer or two or three or four, about 20 suddenly appeared on the scene, arresting anyone in colour, anyone who had brown skin, running around like headless chickens because they didn't have a clue what was going on. They just went in. I mean, arresting these shop owners made sense to a certain degree because they were carrying weapons. And you've got to get that under control first. So, yeah, that does make sense. But they didn't have a clue what they were doing. Then the reporters were saying, oh, no, so there's people in the cars over there they were trying to loot. And so the police then went over and started arresting people who would stop their cars, watching what was happening, putting them out of their cars, trying to arrest them. Of course, the reporters screaming their head off, no, not them, not them. Shut up, woman, you're causing a problem. You're making it worse. Shut up. Jeez, these people. Oh. This situation is going to get worse before it gets better, clearly. As I said in other ones, they're still not looking at the issue. The issue is worthlessness-ism, not racism. Worthlessness-ism. It's a new word, but it's an old issue. This issue's been going on, as I said in other videos, it's been going on for, possibly 30 centuries, where you've had a ruling class, a ruling people, and those ruling people have abused and subjugated the lesser people, the lower class, the poorer people, people with less means, who didn't own properties, rented or whatever. As I said in the previous video, when you have a situation where the landowner, the lord, has the right to be the first one to bed a new bride, how absolutely abhorrent is that? That is truly awful. You imagine being the woman and you've got this bloke who is probably not the best looking, in best condition, who's saying, I've got the right to do that, I'm going to do it. And your first child could be his. You're not married to this person. This person isn't married to you, but he has a right to do that? Insane. But this is what it was years ago. And you look at, you had prisons years ago. You had, even back further, you had the people that hung on and quartered. You had the people that were, put on pikes and stuff like that. Generally speaking, these people weren't the richest of people. They weren't the one-offs. They weren't the landowners. And look at the witch hunt. The witch hunt was basically poor people. Women without means trying to get by, and some of them were trying to use herbs and spices to help to heal people. Selling little bits like that as a way of getting by, being able to buy wood and buy food and buy all the things she needs to buy. And of course, then put on trial as a witch, found guilty, chucked in the river, and if she didn't drown, she was a witch, and so she was burned at the stake. I mean, Jesus Christ, folks! I'm sorry, but even what happened to George Lloyd was nothing compared to that. Nothing compared to that. This worthlessness-ism has been going on for all that time. It was always the case of the rich, the powerful subjugating the poor and the weak. That's why in the Bible it says the opposite. That's why it says, take care of the poor, take care of the meek are blessed, etc., 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 etc. That's why it says, love one another, provide for one another. If someone asks for your hat, you give them your cloak also. Because of the fact it's saying the opposite to the world. The world says, I have more than you, therefore I am worth more than you. You are therefore worth less. If you can get to the point of seeing them as completely worthless, you are able to abuse them. You are able to kill them because they are worthless. That's what the worthlessness-ism has always been about. The way you can abuse people because you take away their worth. If you see someone of any worth, you can't do that to them. And it's not about skin colour. This was going on in Europe long before the African people were brought here on slave ships or any other way. This type of abuse of those that were deemed as worthless was going on then. It's been going on before Cleopatra's time, before the time of the Roman Empire. I mean, the Roman Empire themselves viewed most nations they came across as worthless, and they seriously subjugated and abused those nations. They did it all around the world because they viewed them as worthless, because they weren't of the same value, far less value. They didn't have roads, they didn't have proper latrines, they didn't have proper carts. Their army was poorly trained, etc., etc., etc. So they were worth less. And that's always been the case. Always been the case. You look at films like Robin Hood, those films were of the times, probably, I think, around 1400, around that sort of time. And of course, at that time, you had the rich and powerful, as I talked about earlier, the lords. And that's when they had the power to sleep with the bride. They had the fancy clothes, they had the castles, or the palaces, or the massive houses, the mansions. And the poor just had little hovel villages, little mud shacks that they'd been able to put together. And even they weren't owned by the poor, they were owned by the Lord, because he owned the land that you built your little mud shack on. You had to pay them rent. And they would get greedy. You would have to work for them, and they would pay you a pittance, because of course there was a lot of people, and this is why war. I mentioned in a previous video about this point that the population now has gone out of control, but then the population was reduced to the point where it used to be quite annoying to the rich, because when the poor people were dying off through disease and war and famine, they had less to choose from, so therefore they had to pay them more wages. And that was quite annoying to them, really. But this worthlessness-ism has been going on since the year dot. And that's the thing, and the police, as I say, are in between the rich and powerful and the poor. They were placed in between to protect the rich and powerful and to keep the poor in line. And yeah, some police officers will be seeing the rich and powerful as worth more. Some will see the poor as worth more. They will despise the rich and powerful. But the majority will understand from their own position that they want promotion, they want to get higher and higher and higher. And so they're the ones who will generally see the poorer people as worthless. Take, for example, the officer who killed George Floyd. He had, I think, about 15 or 16 charges against him. Most of which, I think, only two of which, I think, he was disciplined on. It took, I think, 13 charges against him before he even had a warning letter. His boss knew what he was like. The complaints against him were all against minorities, not just brown-skinned people, all minorities. He wasn't a racist just against brown-skinned people. He may have an issue with racism as well. I mean, we know that he had worked with George Floyd as well. They both worked in the same bistro. And they've worked together for years, and maybe the beef between them started then. Or started since then, after that. There's a lot to the story we don't quite understand yet. But the point of it is that the boss of that police officer knew he was a thug. and he didn't try to get rid of him. He had ample opportunity to get rid of that man, and he didn't. It's partly because they want people like that in the police. Yeah, they quash the complaints. Well, saying that, the UK police are far worse in that sense. Far worse. I think in the last 10 years, less people have died at the hands of the police. But I watched an interview the other day where someone was talking about this, and they were saying that in only one case has a policeman been charged with the death of somebody, and that police officer was acquitted. Only one time was a police officer even charged, and he was acquitted. And actually, it took years for that police officer to be charged. Things in the UK take so much longer than they do in America for an officer to be charged. So, it's just as bad in the UK as it is there. I mean, certainly considering the police, generally speaking, in the UK don't carry guns, an awful lot of the police deaths aren't gun related. Yeah, they are still excessive force related. I'll just mention also there was another police situation that was quite disturbing actually. It was a video, I think it was on Now This News, that YouTube channel. There was, I think, a 12-year-old boy who had learning difficulties, mental health issues. And the police were called because I think his grandma had said that the boy had tried to hit her. So the police were called to deal with it. The police have been called to the grandma's house, I think they said about 200 times over the past 3 years. So because of this boy. But this police officer didn't really understand what he was dealing with. And so he got the boy into the car. I think he was trying to strap him in or something, and the boy started kicking out. Next thing we saw was a police officer repeatedly punching this boy. 12 years old. Now, before any judgment is passed, I would say that I personally would never work with mentally handicapped people. Never have done. I've worked with physically handicapped people, physically disabled. I've worked with the elderly. I've never worked with mentally disabled, and I never will. Something I'd never do. Because I just don't have the patience for it. If I see someone hitting out, then yeah, I would likely at some point, if I was working there for a long period of time, use excessive force. That is quite likely. Because I just don't have the patience to deal with that situation. People with that sort of disability need absolute saints. People with incredible patience to deal with them. Obviously, the police officer that went to deal with that child didn't have the right sort of training or the right sort of nature to deal with that. I don't know what happened to the officer. I think it was being looked into. Whether he was fired or not, I don't know. Whether he was charged or not, I don't know. Just another example, and the problem is there will be loads of examples because people video things now. The abuse against people by the police has probably not increased, as I said in the previous video. The 60s and 70s, the police were far more violent than they are now. Far more violent. Even what you saw with George Floyd, that sort of thing would happen a lot more in the 60s and 70s. That would have been commonplace. Yeah, for in the street, an officer to have their knee on somebody's head as a way of basically telling that person, excuse me, I'm the law, you are arguing with me, that's it, I'm stamping on your head. That sort of thing happened then. Doesn't really happen now. Not as much. Nowhere near what it did. So things have got better. It's just that now everyone has a phone that can video anything that happens. So they are. It's just we're seeing more of it now. Yeah, because previously speaking, it was very rare that it would be on the news. But it's very common for it to be on the streets. So you would see some of it on the streets, but that's all you'd see. Whereas now you're seeing it on your news pretty much, once a week. Something happens once a week and you're seeing it. Yeah. And it's making you think this is happening more and more than worse than it ever has before. It's not. Really isn't. Things have improved immensely. I mean, that's just understand that. I mean, the police have done a fantastic job. In some areas, they've got rid of the animals. Yeah, just obviously this police force hadn't. But even the ones standing by, there's a call for the 3 police officers that stood by to also be charged, and I think that's right. The police had this situation a few years ago where they had, I'm not sure if it's America or just the UK, but there was certainly a point that they were saying, if you were in a gang and you knew your gang members were going to break the law and you didn't stop them, you would be held accountable for what they did. Well, these officers, they're the ones who are supposed to serve the law. They're the ones who are supposed to protect and serve the people. There was one of their people who was being abused to the point of death. They should have shoved that officer off of that man. And arrested him on the spot, really. That's what they should have done. The least they should have done was pushed him off that man. Tell him to get off. But they stood by and they watched. They didn't say, right, that's enough. Get off him. He's obviously not fighting you. Get off him. What do you think you're doing? You are being videoed here. So, no. They were happy enough just to go along with it. So, with that perspective, they should really be charged along with the person whose knee was on the head. So, which has now been found to be, what's the word they use? Murder would be one word. What are the words that they commonly used? Homicide. Yes, it's now viewed as a homicide. So the officer himself, initially afterwards, the police were saying he died shortly after. That, I think, was a lie. I think they were telling lies. Because they basically said he was taken to hospital where he died shortly after. Yeah. Well, he's pronounced dead, maybe. But he died with the officer knee on his neck. I think that's what the post-mortem is now saying. So, not good. Not good at all. Well, especially because he was a hopeful man, George Floyd. He moved from one state to Minnesopus, Minnesota. Bringing his friends, telling them to join him there, that's the place to start a new life. It was a good state. Such a shame. Such an absolute shame that that's happened. But there you go. He's in a better place now. But as to the people protesting, understand. Yeah. If you're trying to do something to honour him, look at him. Look at him, understand him, and do something that will actually honour him. rather than do something because you feel a bit angry about what happened and you want to take your anger out on somebody. It's not about you. It's supposed to be about him. So I will leave you there at that point, folks. This video will be called worthlessness-ism. I suppose it's a good title for it. So there you go. You take care. God bless. And I will speak to you soon. And yeah, as I say, realize that the reason why the Bible talks about taking care of the poor is because society is anti-poor. It's anti-poor. It's not anti-brown skin or anti-yellow skin or city-eyed Chinese. That was one abusive tone for the Chinese, wasn't it? But as I say, those people who are Chinese that people are against are the poor, not the rich. Never the rich. The rich are always the ones back home. Even in war, the rich are the ones back home making all the plans, making all the money out of it. They send the poor into war, not the rich. I don't know. The answer is, I suppose, as much as is possible, be led by God. And if you're led by God, you're led by the Holy Spirit, you're not going to go abusing people, no matter what their skin colour. God bless. Bye-bye.